Hello, Mr. Paul here. Nice to see you all again. Sorry it's been a long time. This week's recipe is for a Scotch pie. Now, I have had many requests for it and I apologise it's taken me quite a long time to get round to doing it. But here it is. So, let's do it. So, we're going to make the hot crust pastry now with these three ingredients. Nothing else. Remember, nothing else. There's lard, there's water, and there's salt. Don't take any notice of people on television or on other YouTube videos that tell you to put all sorts of things in. Butter and this, that and the other. Paul Hollywood tells you, Gordon Ramsay tells you, lots of people tell you, do not put butter in your hot crust pastry. I'm telling you, those people who are giving you that information have never ever earned a living or won any awards for making products with hot crust pastry, pork pies, etc. Never. They're only repeating what somebody else has told them. I'm telling you, my family made pork pies by this method for 68 years before I took over. And I worked it for nearly 40 years. And both my father and myself have won many awards for making pork pies, gala pies, all sorts of things, including sausages and black puddings. And so I'm telling you, 3 ingredients only. In the pan now, lard, salt and water. Now the water must be cold water, because whilst it's heating up, we want it to melt the fat. We don't want the water to boil quickly before the fat's melted, otherwise it'll boil away and we'll finish up with not enough water in the recipe. Now the next thing these people tell you on television and on videos is don't let the water boil, water and fat. That's wrong. This must boil rapidly to get a nice crispy crust, okay? Trust me. I'll show you exactly how to do it and I'll guarantee the results. I'm going to turn this up now full. I'm going to let it come to the boil and I'll show you what it looks like before we start adding it to the flour. Okay, now here is the water and the lard and the salt bubbling away. Remember what anybody tells you not to let it boil, ignore that. This is how it should be. Now we're going to go from here straight into the flour. Okay? Right, now here we have the flour and nothing else in there. I'm using bread flour as I explained to you earlier, but you can use ordinary all-purpose flour. And this has just come off the boil and it's going to go straight in to the flour. Straight in. Mixer on, slow speed. And remember, you can mix this by hand or with a wooden spoon, of course, because it's too hot, but you don't need a machine. I'm only using a machine, as I've said a lot of times on my videos. I have very bad arthritis in my hands and I can't do it by hand anymore, so I use the machine. But it's a very soft dough, it doesn't need a lot of kneading, it just needs mixing together and you're ready to go. I'm going to leave this mixing for about a minute, that's all. Okay, so that's about a minute. We've been mixing. There's a little bit of flour just on the mixer, on the beater there. Hasn't got mixed in. I'll just blend that in. There we are. And this is the hot water crust. Now it's very hot, so be careful at the moment, but that's what it looks like. I'm sure you can see that. It's nice and soft. You can't use it as it is. It's too floppy. Leave that to cool down and you can leave it in there all night. You don't have to put it in the fridge, otherwise it'll go very hard like the lard was to start with. Leave it out, and tomorrow you'll be able to mix it and mould it just like plasticine. When that's gone cold, I'll show you exactly what the consistency is like. Right, here we are with the pastry, which has been cooling overnight. Remember, ignore what these people on television and on other videos tell you. You must use it whilst it's hot or it'll get crumbly and difficult to use. This is how the pastry should look. It should be like plasticine almost. Can you see that? There's nothing crumbly or stiff or unmanageable about that. You can use it, you can mould it to any shape you want without worrying about it. Now, one of the secrets of making hot crust pastry, which none of these so-called experts who know nothing about it seem to forget, you do not add any flour to this pastry or to your work surface. That's most important. There's enough fat in there to stop it sticking to anything. Okay, now before I go to the rest of the pastry, we're going to talk about the tins. Now these are tins I have used for many years in the bakery. We use them for pork pies. We also use them for Scotch pies, which pretty much the same idea. Scotch pies. I use them for a lot of other things. I use them for deep steak pies sometimes. I use them for chicken and mushroom pies, but basically they're pork pie tins. Now I use them for making the Scotch pie cases, which I'm going to make today. If you haven't got anything like that, you might have something like this. This is a springform tin. It's one of the smallest ones. I think you can buy one smaller one, but I couldn't buy any at the time. I've only bought this to show you because I don't use them. This is sold online or in cook shops, and it's usually called a mini cheesecake tin. A mini cheesecake. Now that makes a very nice pork pie or a very nice Scotch pie. In fact, they make any kind of pie, and they're easy to release because you remove that, and of course the pie just pops out without worrying about it sticking or doing anything like that. So that's called a mini cheesecake tin, I think. But they are available online. I didn't buy this one online particularly. I bought it in a cook shop. But I do think, and they didn't have any at the time, I do think they're doing a smaller one, which is a little bit more akin to this size. Okay? So now we'll come to the pastry. So what we're going to do is we're going to get my rolling pin. And I'm going to, and just the same when you're rolling any kind of pastry, keep it on the move. That way it won't stick very much. Now, you don't need to roll this too thin to start with, because what we're going to be able to do, whoops, torn it there, what we're going to be able to do is, because this is so malleable, this pastry, we're going to be able to pop it in the tin like that. And we're going to mould it up the side of the tin with our thumb and bring the pastry up to the top. You can see how that's happening now. So mould it up to the top and keep going round until you get a nice overlap there on top. So I've got the cases filled now. Here you can see I've drawn it up the sides, so we've got a nice overlap. That one just needs drawing up a little bit further. See, it's just like plasticine or putty. You can move it and fiddle about with it as much as you want. Just make sure there are no holes in the bottom, that's all. Okay? Because we don't need an overlap on these like on the pork pies. We need something here on the pork pies to actually stick the lid to. We don't need that with Scotch pies. So we're going to trim that straight round, level with the top. All of them straight round, level with the top. Now this pastry here that we've trimmed off, we're going to put with the rest of it there. And if you want to fill a tin like this, then do exactly the same. Roll it out and form it up the sides. The pastry is going to go in a plastic bag in the freezer, and it's all ready to go next time. Lift it out, let it thaw at room temperature, and you won't need to bother making any. These are going to sit like this for hours. In the shop, we leave these to dry like this for either 1 or sometimes 2 days. Okay, I know that seems strange, but we don't use them like this because the pastry will probably shrink and go out of shape. When Scotch pie manufacturers up in Scotland who make nothing else, some of them make no other pies, only Scotch pies, they actually make them and leave them resting for 24 to 36 hours. Now, a proper Scotch pie is not cooked in a tin like this. It's cooked like a Melton Mowbray pork pie, and it's removed from that tin. When it's dried, it's removed from that tin and cooked what we call unprotected, unsupported. I don't do that because it's quite complicated, and when you have staff dealing with it, they can't always manage it. So I just let these dry out now. These will dry out again 8 or 9 hours, probably overnight. We always left them overnight, and then I'll come back and show you how we deal with them. But in the meantime, I'm going to make the filling. While they're drying off, I'm going to show you how to make the filling. Okay? Now the recipe is underneath the video, and it's also on my website. And I will be using 300 grams of minced lamb. It traditionally was a mutton pie. Mutton is no longer a staple product you can buy in supermarkets. You never see it these days. You might, if you have a halal butcher near you, you might be able to buy some there because they sell a lot of mutton, which is an older lamb. Okay, it's sheep that's more than 3 years old. And it's a bit fattier and a little bit tastier, but it makes it much more succulent. But I couldn't get that today. Here in Spain, they kill their sheep or lambs, whatever you want to call them, very, very young. So it's very, very pale looking, and I've had to add a little bit. I've had to add a little bit of fat to it because it was very, very lean. Okay, so let's get on with doing the filling. Here in my bowl, I have 300 grams of minced lamb. I did explain just a few seconds ago that I've had to add a little bit of fat because it was very, very lean. Now, we need to add very little liquid to this. It's very important, otherwise you'll get it boiling out all over and ruining the look of the pies. So, for a start, I'm going to measure out some of my lamb stock. I'm measuring 2 tablespoons to start with, okay, 2 tablespoons to start with. And I'm going to add to that my mixed herbs and the mace. Now, if you haven't got mace, use ground nutmeg. It's both from the same plant. Mace is only the shell round the nutmeg, so it's a very, very similar taste. So we're going to add that to there. Stir it up nicely. And we're going to add that into our meat in a moment. I'm going to add 3/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Now, I've added, this stock is lamb stock. I'm using a lamb stock cube. They're not easy to find here. Unfortunately in Spain I can't buy them anywhere. You might be able to buy them where you live. If not, use chicken stock. But I make frequent visits over to North Africa and into Morocco, which is very easy from here, and I bring back these Knorr lamb cubes which they use by the bucketful over there. So that's going in there. We're mixing in the salt and the pepper, and now the liquid and the mixed herbs and the mace. And we just want to mix that gently until it's all mixed together. We may need to add a little more of the lamb stock. We'll just see how moist it is. It depends how fresh the meat is. The fresher the meat, the less stock you have to add. If you had the meat sitting in the fridge a few days, then you might need to add a little more lamb stock before you use it. But what we don't want to make it soggy. That's very important. You can see it's not being soggy, it's still quite free. It's not going in big wet clumps, which I don't want. And feeling at that, I think that's quite moist enough. I think. It needs to sort of just hold together when I do that, but still crumble away if I want it to. Okay, so that's the next thing we're going to do. Mix it well, first of all. Don't squeeze it and squash it with your hands. We don't want to make sausage meat out of it. Just keep going round and round the ball, and lifting it from the bottom to the top. So there's the filling made. Smells absolutely delightful already with the mace and the mixed herbs. I'm going to put that in the fridge now and leave that there until my pastry cases are ready. So, once the pastry cases are ready to fill, I'll be back and show you what happens next. Right, the cases have been setting now for overnight. You don't have to leave them overnight, 2 or 3 hours will do for you, but we always used to leave them overnight in the bakery. This is what they look like. I'll show you exactly what they look like. And we've got the filling, which is already made. Now we need to make the lids. Here we go. Small amount of pastry. And remember what I said to you before about not putting any flour on the pastry or on the work surface. When you're doing hot crust pastry, if you get flour on it and the pastry actually folds when you're putting it in the tin or on the lid, it won't stick where the flour is and you'll get a crack. Okay? So you always need to roll this without adding any flour to the pastry or to the work surface. Now we need to roll it quite thin for this, quite thin, and we're going to cut out the lid with our cutter so it is just slightly smaller than the top of the pie. Now when we're making the lids, we need to roll the lid out and we need to make a hole in the middle. I'm using an apple corer for that. You can use whatever you've got. Okay, I'm using an apple corer. So we need to roll out 4 lids for this. Do those quickly. Contrary to what all the chefs and so-called experts on television tell you, you can't use it when it's gone cold. This is exactly how it should be used. It's very flexible, very manipulative, and it's easy to use. Now we come to filling the tins with the pastry with the meat. Now the meat needs to go into the tins and be pushed down gently into the corners. We don't want any of the corners empty when we cut the pie. And we need to fill these tins about 2/3 full, probably a little bit more. If you can just see, I've left a ridge around there, so there's not full to the top. So we're going to, and it's important, as I told you before, not to have this filling too wet, otherwise your pastry will not be, it's supposed to be very crispy and crunchy as the pastry in a Scotch pie. And be generous with your pepper, because they need to be peppery as well. There we are. Get those all filled nicely. Make sure it's into the corners. And because we've let this pastry dry, we don't need to be too gentle with it because it won't damage. It's nicely dried off. So that's going to be filled about a bit more than 2/3 full. You can see there, just leaving a nice little ridge. And we're going to now pop on the lids. Now with this, there is absolutely no necessity to seal them. Just make sure they touch the sides all the way round inside the pie, like that. If you find your pastry shrunk a little bit, sometimes it does, just give it a little gentle roll and make sure it fits in the pie and touches the edges of the pastry. But you're not putting it on top of anything, so you don't have to wet it to stick it on or anything like that. This one shrunk a little bit, just stretch it out, and there we go. You can see, fits quite nicely. Just bring it to the edges. Now traditionally, Scotch pies don't have any egg wash on them at all. They just cook as they are. If you wanted a nice glossy finish, you can put some egg wash on, but it doesn't look right. It's not a Scotch pie. These are going to go into the oven now for about 45 minutes at about 200 degrees. So, here they are, straight out of the oven. I've taken from the tins, let them cool down a little. They are very hot at the moment, but as you can see, no glaze on them, just a nice little bit more colour than I would have liked. They're usually much paler than that, but not to worry, they're a nice looking pie. Now you can serve this with baked beans, which are absolutely delightful. I've only cut it to let you see inside there, but normally this hollow in the top is to hold in the beans. Or you can serve it with a little sauce of some kind, in this case tomato ketchup. This is when they're being eaten either warm or cold, it doesn't matter, you can have them with a salad or... Oh, and this is some nice brown sauce that I made. Similar to HP, but I made it myself. Or, of course, if you really wish, you can have it as a main meal. Well, that's all for this time, folks. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Have a go, make them. I'm sure you'll like them. If you've enjoyed it, go down below. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or even any ideas for future videos, leave them underneath in the comments. I read them all and try to answer as many as I possibly can. So this is Mr. Paul saying bye for this time, and I'll see you soon. Bye!